Hi, I'm Kaytlyn,
And I'm Brianna.
and welcome to the Readers Clubhouse, where we revisit our childhood favorite content.
So, Kaytlyn, how
What?
do you feel about reading tragedies? Specifically, the book kinds.
The book kinds. I mean, generally, it's a no because is that true though? Oh my gosh. I think what I enjoy is when it doesn't. I mean, this is that little, so it's not a tragedy. Actually, what I'm about to say makes it not a tragedy immediately. I like it
Uh-oh.
when it doesn't end in tragedy.
That's
Which
valid.
again makes it not a tragedy. I don't mind
Yeah.
when tragedies happen inside of things.
Yeah.
Um, it adds flavor to what you're reading. It adds depth to the characters. There's a lot of really good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's not my vibe
No,
necessarily.
I'm. Yeah.
If the whole book is about tragedies and it's just dark and sad and sad and sad and sad, I'm like, where's the hope? Where's the goodness that comes on the other side of things?
Yeah, we are chronic hope core people, so
Mm-hmm.
generally our.
What's chronic hope core? What's hope core?
Do you don't know what a hope core is? This is again the funny thing of the
No.
fact that I'm older than you and you don't know this internet slang. I mean,
For
so, chronic, you know what chronic
Yeah,
means.
I know what chronic means. Yeah, I know that
Okay.
one.
Hope core is literally something
Mhm.
that like is very hopeful. A lot of things are called blank core or something like
Yeah,
that. It's just like
cottage
the core
core.
of it. Yes.
Yeah,
So hope core, do you see the connection there?
yeah. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Okay.
I've literally
Um
never heard that in my life, but okay,
so weird. I mean, again, you're not on TikTok, so
I'm
that
not.
doesn't surprise me. I feel
No,
both old and young at the same time, which is a weird place to be. I also
I'm
feel the
there
same way.
often.
You what?
I'm there often.
Yes, yeah. We both are like grandmas in young people's bodies, mentally
Yeah,
grandma
man.
though. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel the same exact way about tragedies. I have a
Hmm.
hard time with them, especially if it ends in tragedy. I will usually get very upset. There's only one exception to that. I'm not going to get into fully it is,
Ooh,
but if anybody's ever watched the specifically anime movie called Millennium Actress, that is the only tragedy that I will watch and like actually
interesting.
enjoy because it has a core of hope in it, but it's still tragic because of the way that
Okay,
it ends and stuff. I'm not going to explain it
wild.
here. It will take me way too long and everything. But that's the
Hmm.
only like tragic piece of media that I will watch and rewatch and everything. At some point, I should make you watch it, unless I already
Okay.
have. I can't
No, you definitely
remember.
haven't. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I've never heard of this as far as I'm aware.
Oh, that's so weird. Okay. So yeah, the reason why I bring up tragedies today
Hmm.
is the book that we're reading is Martin the Warrior. And Martin the
Mm,
Warrior in the series of Redwall is probably one of the more tragic ones, unfortunately.
absolutely, it is.
Yes, yeah. And it it's not a fun book to read in a lot of ways. In the concept of like again uplifting, all of that kind of stuff. It's
Hmm.
a hard book in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. And so, yeah, that's part of the reason why I want to kind of start us off with that question like, how do we feel about that? So,
Hmm.
to get us going, so you guys kind of get an idea about this book we've so far, recap, we have gone through Redwall, which is the very first published book in the
Hmm.
Redwall series. Then we went to Mossflower, which is the second book that was published, but
Hmm.
also a prequel to Redwall. So it was set
Hmm.
many, in this case, the language for the books, seasons before Redwall and everything. And
Hmm.
there's a number of stories between the two of those, but we'll get to those a different day.
Yeah.
This one is set directly before Mossflower, and it
Hmm.
is a more in-depth look at Martin's life before he ended up in Mossflower Woods. I believe this is the sixth book that was published. I might be a
Yeah.
little bit off on that, but that sounds about right. And then I cannot remember where it is, number wise, chronically, or yeah, chronically and that and stuff. But publishing wise, it was definitely, I believe, number six.
Yeah. It was.
It was, yes. Oh, did you look it up?
No, I just know it was sixth published because
Okay.
Redwall is sixth chronologically, but Martin the Warrior is
Oh,
6 published. I think Martin
that's right.
is third chronologically, because there's, I believe, 2 that technically come before his
Okay,
book.
that does sound right. We'll cover that though at a different time when we do get to those books. So the release year for this book was 1993. Again, for those joining us, we've already talked about who Brian Jacques is, and
Mm-hmm.
he again is the author of the series. He was a man of many talents. This is genre-wise a fantasy genre book, and it is generally meant for students the ages of 8 to 14. So
Mm-hmm.
in like book talk, it would be like middle grade to refer to that in the industry and everything. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the playing field with this book, which is funny that it's set with middle grade, especially with how tragic this book is and everything.
Yeah.
So I am going to do an overview. I apologize if this is kind of long, guys. Please let us know. It's we're just some like info behind the scene, the curtain kind of a thing with us. We are pre-recording a lot of the stuff before we've actually released. So
Yeah.
if you're like, why have they not changed this? We've already 3 or 4 episodes in. It's because we are still in the process of figuring ourselves out and figuring out how we want to do the setup and stuff. So just want to be
Yeah.
completely honest with you guys. That's what we're doing. So I'm going to do the overview for the book.
Mm-hmm.
If you guys like it or love it or don't want me to leave it, etc., let us know. But this is what I'm going to be doing until I hear otherwise. So,
Yeah. I'd
to
also
get
just like
us.
to say,
Oh,
wait, hold on.
yes.
I
Yep.
would just like to say, if you know us and you sat with us as one or both of us is trying to explain something, just be happy because it could be a lot longer, is all I'm
It's
saying.
true. We could
So,
spend the whole podcast just word for word telling you what happens in this book.
or not even word for word. Let's be real, Brianna. It's like, oh, this happened and then that happened. Oh my gosh, I forgot to tell
True.
you though. This thing happened right before that, but then this thing happened even like before that, and then this thing happened
That's
next.
true. We are
Weird
chronic.
nonsense.
We're chronic ramblers.
Oh, we so
Also,
are. I'm sorry to
yes.
anyone who's listened to me talk about my favorite podcast. Anyway, go on.
All right. So to start us off, again, for some context, this is set a few seasons right before Mossflower, the majority of the story. But to start us off, the story starts actually in a time period that we have not covered yet, in between Mossflower and Redwall. And at some point, we'll be covering it in some later books. It won't be right away, but we'll get to them eventually. But during this time period, we are introduced to 2 travelers who have come from a long way, and they approach Redwall Abbey and say, "We actually have a story about Martin the Warrior, one that you do not know, and one that we are now able to share with you." And so they sit down with the residents of the Abbey at that time, and they explain one of the stories about Martin the Warrior that was not known up until that point. So, many seasons ago, Martin was held captive by a retired Stoat pirate captain and was made to help build the large fortress for Badrang the Tyrant. He is our bad guy in this case. Many seasons before this, Martin had been caught near his childhood home by Badrang and brought to where this fortress was being built. Martin was not one to just roll over and obey, and often was defiant with Badrang, who had taken his father's sword from him. A very similar thing to what happened in Mossflower. During one act of rebellion, Martin was put on the outside walls where he was attacked by various seabirds, but due to some help from some other slaves, a young mouse maid named Late Rose, or just Rose, as she usually likes to be called, and a mole named Grum, they were able to free Martin as well as a few others. They planned to go to Rose's home, Noonvale, for assistance against Badrang, but Martin, Rose, and Grum were separated from their friends Feldo, the squirrel, and Rose's brother Brom. Martin, Rose, and Grum go on a perilous journey to Noonvale, where they run afoul of pygmy shrews, reptiles, and other vermin. When they finally arrive, they are greeted by Rose's mother and father, but Rose's father states that they cannot help Martin on his request, but any that wish to go with him can. During this time, Martin and Rose realize they have feelings for each other, and Martin vows to keep her safe, and they take a small force back with them to the fortress. But this is not enough to stop Badrang, so a scholarly owl named Boldred, that they had befriended along the way, volunteers to help with this, and asks that they trust her and that she'll bring more help when it is needed at the right time. In the meantime, Feldo and Brom, who they lost previously, find friends with a traveling band of performers. the rambling rosehip players. The friends and these new friends that they acquire scheme to free their fellow slaves from the hands of Badring. Under the premise of a performance at the fortress, the friends and performers are able to enact a plan that frees almost all the slaves from Badring's clutches. Badring chases them but does not succeed in recapturing them. After this, the slaves revel in their freedom, but they seek to take Badring down completely. After further conflict, the loss of some dear friends, and a long journey back to the fortress, the two groups of fighters converge and start the final conflict. It is a long and bitter fight, and more are lost. Sadly, Rose herself is lost in an attempt to help Martin, and Martin is devastated that he could not protect her like he vowed. After the conflict and some time alone with his friends, they all part ways and never see each other again. Martin heads south on to his further destiny. So, that is the basic outline of the story that we kind of read in this book. So,
Honestly,
before we move on to
I just want to say that I am actually impressed that is relatively succinct considering how much stuff is inside this book.
Thank you. Hopefully, I get even better at it as time goes on, because
hopefully.
Yeah, it definitely, I had to like really think about like, okay, do I leave out this part? We don't need to talk about XYZ during this like very brief part. So thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's just our other thoughts section, starting out as we often do. And I don't know if we will every time, but certainly in these particular ones, with songs and poetry. The two kind of main things. So we don't have Gonf in this book. He comes later to Martin. But we have Rose, who sings a bit, and then we have the rosehip players, who are the troupe of actors and singers and things, and they perform and use some poetry to enact their shenanigans at Marshank Fortress.
So many shenanigans.
So many shenanigans. I mean, when you've got like a bunch of squirrels, a hare, and a badger all doing their dang thing, it's hilarious.
True.
Yeah, I think just some thoughts on the songs and the poetry, specifically a really cool interaction, I thought, between so Martin and some of his friends, while they're still at Marshank, are in a pit, sort of like a dungeon pit they're thrown in because of disobedience.
Yes. Yeah.
And that includes Brom, Rose's brother, and they're trying to be free. They're trying to escape. Martin, before this, was, as we said, was chained to a post outside on the wall in the middle of a storm. Seagulls are attacking him, and what saves him is this mouse maid named Rose, who uses her slingshot to get the eagle or the seagulls away, and then she asks Martin, do you know of a mouse named Brom or Brom? Is it Brom or Brom?
I think it's Brom. I always got confused, even though I listened to it.
It's Grum is the mole companion. Yeah. And then Brom.
I think it's Brom because I'm pretty sure it's Brome or something like that.
It is Brom. Yes. Gosh. Okay. Grum and Brom. What a combo. What a name combo. So that happens. Martin gets put down in a pit with two other people. I believe it's Feldo and Brom, and then Martin. And that's how they escape. But what I find absolutely fascinating is the way they use music in this, or maybe not just music, maybe just singing, because there's an otter named Keela who plays a significant part in sort of some of the story. And he is he's the slave that's in charge of feeding the people in the pit, and he comes around, and he and Rose actually communicate through song.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
He's pretending to just be like a little bit of a crazy otter and just starts singing aloud, and then she's not actually singing. She's using eagle shout to like eagle cause to say like, okay, I hear you, I understand what's happening. Meanwhile, Keela's just bebopping around the fortress singing to himself like a nutter, which is fantastic. The troupe uses songs and acting and dancing and those fun things to get into the fortress and then to rescue some people from the fortress. And it's just funny. The hare that is in there, he's a particularly limericky fellow and makes a lot of little ditties
Yeah.
and things, and including making some really silly things. Again, there's not as much poetry or songs because Gomf isn't in here, and even though Rose is pretty
Yeah.
is sort of a bard, if we're classifying them in that way, she's not as song oriented as Gonf is or will be, I guess.
No. She's just lauded as having
Mm-hmm.
a beautiful voice and like loves to
Yeah.
sing and things like that. So like she, I almost like feel like she'd be classified in like in
Mm-hmm.
another fantasy setting as a
Oh yeah.
songstress or something like that. Yeah, and not like a full bard.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't like perform necessarily the
Yeah.
same way a bard would. But yeah, it definitely with like there's not as much in here. It's so interesting to me how much Brian Jacques loved
Yeah.
putting this kind of stuff in it. And I mean, enough that we're
Yeah.
able to talk about it every single time, basically. So it's very interesting the different like ways that he used
Yeah.
that and the different
Absolutely.
characters that he has do with that. And like also how it kind of ties in sometimes weirdly, not weirdly, but ties in culturally with the
Yeah.
group that it's like a part of
I
sometimes
also
even.
love
So
that
it's very interesting.
he often will write essentially sea shanties for the water travel.
Yeah.
I think it's just really fun to have that kind of sea shanty party as, you know, a bunch of shrews are rowing down the river or something like that, or a bunch of otters are at sea on their ship,
Yeah.
or, you know, all those random
Yeah.
things.
Absolutely.
Cool. Shall we move on to world building?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Because we see some new spaces again here that are really fascinating. Because Redwall is actually not mentioned here once. Not even once. Except, sorry.
Not
Okay, yes, you were about to correct me.
yes.
It's in the
Clarification.
prologue and it's in the epilogue, but it's not in the bulk of the story.
Yes.
So when
No, it's not in the actual story that's being
no,
told
so
itself.
you don't see Redwall at all. The main sort of the two main physical locations are Marshank Fortress, and then you see Noonvale, which is a sort of secret
Yeah.
society hidden away. It's a utopia. It's very peaceful. Marshank is a dictatorship, and Badrang the Stoat is in charge, and he's all the woodland creatures are his slaves, and all the vermin creatures are his soldiers. You also hear a bit about the coast where Martin was born. You learn about him being born in some caves, and his father went off to go fight sea rats and then never came back. And then some seasons later,
Yeah.
Martin still being a very, very young mouse, pirates, actually Badrang's ship crashes onto the land, and then the vermin kill a bunch of Martin's sort of tribe, mouse tribe. No? What do you mean no?
No. No. That is not what happens. Martin runs off. This is like a little bit after his dad leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Runs off. He was told not to, and he runs off and is off by himself at somewhere like far away from where his
Yeah.
like home is. Not super super far, but it's enough that his grandma follows him and is like, "What are you doing?" And as that happens, Badrang and his crew show up and they capture him and his grandmother.
But how does Tim Ballisto tie into that? Is Tim Ballisto one of his father's friends?
Tim
Or was
Ballisto,
Tim Ballisto?
no, Tim Ballisto was one of the older kids.
Okay.
So he was a little bit older than Martin, but he wasn't kidnapped with them. He was kidnapped after Martin left.
Oh.
That's why he was on that
Ship
one
in
slave ship
Mossflower.
rat thing in
Yeah.
Mossflower.
Okay.
Yes.
Gosh. That's what
So,
happens when you read
yeah.
things in the order that we were reading them, Brianna. Okay,
Yeah.
so Badrang.
I'm actually surprised that I
Me
remembered
too.
all of that.
Not gonna lie. So Badrang kills Grandma.
Yeah. Well, he takes Grandma as a slave, and
Right.
Grandma can't
and she
handle
dies.
it.
So,
Yeah.
and then Martin
Yes.
unfortunately
So,
survives. I think that's kind of it. You get like the different locations they travel. It's often rivers and forests and mountains and dunes
yeah.
and, you know.
The one thing I will say, I don't think Noonvale is ever talked about again
No, it never is.
in this series. Yeah, which I think is fascinating. I know it's like a secret society, but the fact that it establishes in this book that literally two people from there, like, albeit like seasons after Martin ever
Mm-hmm.
interacted with them and stuff, they showed up and
Yep.
conveyed this place, like conveyed the story to them, and
Mm-hmm.
then never is talked about again and
Never.
stuff, which I think
Not
is interesting. Yeah.
not even in the books that the epilogue, the prologue and epilogue are based, the timeline they're based around. It's never mentioned,
Yeah.
I believe, in any of those books either.
Yeah. So it's just interesting that he introduced this place
Mm-hmm.
and never taps into it again. But I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember how often they go up north
Yeah, not
with
as
certain things.
often,
So
because I know
yeah.
that, well, I don't want to say things because we'll get to those books eventually. There's
Yeah.
a few
That's
times
kind of,
you get some
yeah.
northern creatures, or they have to make journeys up north. But
Yeah.
actually, we discovered today, hilarious, we didn't Google this before, but discovered
Yeah.
today that the Redwall Wiki fandom page has a map that someone has made that has all the
Yeah.
locations from the books, or at least the majority of the locations from the books on it. And so if you want a good visual representation of, okay, so this is set in a different area, but where, go find the Redwall map. If you've read these books and you recognize the names, you can find them on the map. If you don't, you can always just look
Yeah.
things up, or just listen to our podcast and get the summaries and then be
Yeah.
like, oh, they said the word Marshank. Where's Marshank? Marshank is
Yeah.
north and east slightly. So it
Yeah.
helps to kind of ground the locations in a particular area and to see where things actually are. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
anyway, I guess that's a shout out
Um,
to Wiki fandom and the people who are hard at work with the Redwall fandom. Thank you guys.
yeah, definitely. People still really love the series all these years
Mm-hmm.
later.
Which
One
is
other thing we
why
wanted to, oh, yeah.
Netflix is making, I believe, an adaptation of this series. I heard
What?
that on the internet somewhere. That could be a lie. So I'll come back to you guys next episode and be like, I'm a liar. Just kidding.
If it's real, I'm both concerned and excited, kind of a
Yes.
thing.
Yeah. I call that
So,
cautiously
yeah.
hopeful.
Cautiously hopeful is a good way of putting it,
Thank
honestly.
you.
Because I like. No, we're not going to go with that. That
No,
will take way
no,
too long to
that
talk
will
about. Yeah.
derail us.
So they will so much derail us. But yeah, so that's very interesting. One
Mm.
other thing we did want to touch on with this, and it kind of leans into the discrepancy bit a little.
Yeah.
It does have a reason behind it, but it's
Yeah.
still like kind of odd to me, honestly. So we know, again, we talked at the beginning, this is a tragedy.
Mm.
During the course of this story, Martin falls in love with Rose. Rose falls in love with Martin. They're both young and attracted to each other, etc.
Yeah.
And everything. And Rose dies at the end, and it devastates Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And during the ending bit, he spends some time with this one side character who's kind of like almost like a mole seer woman
Yeah.
and stuff. And she takes care of him and his friends. And they just have this like time together after going through all of
Yeah.
that. And at the very end of their time together, they all vow never to speak of any of this ever again and go their separate
That's
ways.
just insane to me.
It is insane to me too, because I'm like, I don't honestly, and I can't remember all of the reasoning that he put into this book why they would do that. I don't even remember and stuff, but I'm just like, you lost somebody that you were completely in love with up until the end and everything like that and stuff. And I'm just like, I don't know why you would never talk about her and stuff. If that's not honoring, like, I mean, honestly, maybe to some people that is. Maybe it's just like not
Yeah.
remembering things. Maybe it was his guilt that made him never want to talk about it. But just like that was honestly an odd way to go about it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So a little bit of context with the way the story was written. This story was written after Mossflower.
Yeah.
So in the context of the writer himself with this, he didn't figure out any of this stuff until after he'd already written the one that technically comes after this one and stuff. So that's honestly, I love series, but sometimes it is a little bit
Yeah.
frustrating when you run into those things where it's like, this is actually, I mean, he could have thought of mentioning Rose at any point during his
Mm-hmm.
like many things that he dealt with during the course
Many,
of
many seasons.
the many, many seasons, especially when he was in Mossflower and like dealing with all that stuff. And it's just this like very interesting why he chose to like add in this even further backstory for this character in
Yeah.
this context, and how it affected him, but also we never got to see it affect him in this case. There
Yeah.
is one other story, and I'm actually really curious to get to this one eventually.
Yeah.
The Legend of Luke book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to talk in depth about it, but just to give you guys kind of a little bit of an idea with that one, that talks about Martin's father and
Mm-hmm.
his journey, but it also has some like tidbits where it's like Martin figuring all this out. He like, I think it's set after Mossflower and stuff.
Yep.
So I'm interested to get to that book and be reminded about
Yeah.
what maybe context, because that one was written after both of these.
Yeah.
So that he's going to be, it has the context of both of these books in that. And I cannot remember if he maybe mentions Rose at any point during that. I'm like really curious to see.
Yeah.
Do
I don't
you,
think I do not think he
okay.
does.
Okay.
Again, when we get to that point, we'll see. I just want
Yeah.
to read what Martin's
Okay.
reasoning for his vow
Okay.
silence is.
Yeah.
So he's talking to his friends. Martin has been nonverbal for a little while because of grief and
Ah.
recovering from a wound. And they're asking Martin where he's going to go next, basically. Because they invite him to go
Yeah.
with them back to Noonvale. They invite him to go back to, like, with the traveling troupe somewhere.
Ah.
And he says, I can never return to Noonvale. I will travel alone south. That's a geographical hint for you guys that Redwall is in the south. Well, I guess, anyway,
Yeah.
he wouldn't have
Well,
known that, but
just Mossflower at this
yeah.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. So it says they listened carefully, knowing that this would be the last time he would speak to them at any length. One day, maybe, I will hang up the sword and be a creature of peace. Until then, I must follow the way of the warrior. It is in my blood. Have no fear, I will never mention Noonvale, nor any of you. Noonvale is a secret place untouched by evil. I could not forgive myself if I unknowingly sent trouble there. No beast will know from where I came. Palom stared quizzically at his stern-eyed friend. Palom is one of the companions that he meets. But what will you say? We had such adventures together. Maybe in another time and another place you will tell the tale. Never. Martin shook his head slowly. I will only say that I guarded my father's cave against sea rats while he was away. When I felt that he would not return, I began my wanderings. How could any beast understand what we went through together, the freedom we won, and the friends we lost? Ooh, I just made myself emotional. Okay. Moving on.
I will say Brian gets you really a lot at those ending, like
He
final.
so does.
Yeah, he really does.
He's
really gets
it's there's just something about him. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he takes what we're calling the vow of silence, that he's never going to mention his friends, he's never going to mention his experiences and things like that. And it's just, this is why we're calling it a tragedy, because as much as they win the day, they defeat Marshank, they defeat Badrang, they destroy Marshank. Not everybody lives. And in particular, Rose dies. And it's honestly, it's so sad the way that she dies. And I remember reading it for the first time and being really sad. And then reading it again this time, I just, every time. And just the rage and the grief that Martin experiences. Because Badrang's the one, I believe, that kills her.
I believe so, yeah.
It's just, she's fighting Badrang, and he just flings her away from the wall, like at a wall, and she smashes her head into the wall and is instantly dead.
Yeah.
It's just devastating.
Yeah.
Anyway, speaking of Rose, we're going to talk about our favorite characters. And I'd like to go first because I still want to talk about Rose.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, top favorite character is Rose. She is competent. She isn't a warrior in the sort of, I guess, Martin the Warrior traditional sense of a fighter. She doesn't fight with a sword, shield. She usually uses a sling and some other sort of whatever's around her. But she's wickedly intelligent. She is a good singer, which is totally random, but that's just cool little tidbit about her. Mm-hmm. But I think she is, again, one of those characters that to the end she is filled with hope. She says, I'm going to push on
Yeah.
even when things get difficult. And also, she's willing to sacrifice her comfort and her security and safety in order to
Yeah.
see this injustice destroyed. She knows that there are a ton of woodlanders still at Marshank. They're still in danger. And no matter what, even if they take away the woodlanders, they don't defeat Badrang, it's just going to continue. He will go out, he will find new slaves, he will take over new places, he will destroy and bring
Yeah.
death and destruction upon the land. And she, even though she comes from a pacifist place, her father's a pacifist,
Yeah.
and that's one of the reasons he says, we can't help you, Martin, is because they don't fight. They're not warriors. They're creatures of peace, and they bring about their goal is to live in peace. And I actually think there's this really interesting contrast between Noonvale and Redwall, where Noonvale is this hidden place that is very much where you come to us and you will find peace. You come to us and we will, and it's a secret. You don't know where we are. It's you have to find us in, somehow through guidance or whatever. Where Redwall is this place that's established in the middle. It's in the open. It's in the forest, but like it's a public forest essentially. There's loads of people just running around. Well, people, animals, whatever. And it's a place that even though it is like come to us and our doors are open, there is this still sense of we're going out, that our reach is far. Anywhere you go in Mossflower Wood and even places far away, people know of Redwall because they hear it's a place of refuge, it's a place of safety. They're people of peace and they're creatures that bring peace. And so Rose, I think, is a really good archetype of what Redwall aspires to be. I aspire to be peaceful, I aspire to be gentle and compassionate and kind. But also when I see injustice, when I see evil winning, when I see creatures harmed by evil creatures, I'm going to say, even though I believe in peace and even though I believe, often there's a better way if we just think a little harder, I'm still going to say, but when push comes to shove, evil is evil and we're going to stop it. Yeah. So Rose is just incredible character. Maybe I should do like a top 10 of Brian Jacques character deaths of like which wrecked me the most, because some of them there's a few in his books that are just absolutely not pun intended, but they're killer. They just seriously get you
absolutely
in the emotions.
Yeah, there's one that immediately comes to my brain when I think about that devastated me. We haven't read the book yet, but when we get to it, I'm like very interested to see how I react to it again.
Totally.
At that time.
I just know that I'm gonna freaking cry.
Yeah.
And then my other favorite character is Keela. He's an otter. He's strong. He's brave. He's intelligent. He helps people escape. He goes back for, those who have lagged behind. And I just think he's a really great character. Just, unfortunately, Rose is the best. So, in my opinion. What about you, Brianna?
Yeah. So we haven't really got to talk about these two characters all that much, just because there's a lot to cover in this. So trying to touch on everybody's story, it's a lot. We did mention in that one of my favorite characters is Boldred, the owl. I don't remember if they mentioned what type of owl she is.
I can't remember.
But she is a cartographer. She and her husband, whose name I can't remember, they love to map the areas and everything. And she was a really great character. She was very intelligent, but she also was very loving and like family oriented at the same time. Like her and her husband love to travel, but they also like her also, again, it's so funny because Brian Jacques says this a couple of times, the stay-at-home husbands thing. Like he loved to stay home with their daughter and stuff. And it just like, it's really funny to me that happens a couple of times in these series, at least from the couple that we've read so far and stuff. Especially like these were written in the late 80s, early 90s at this point. So like very interesting that he's had multiple girl characters have like these like professions, or they just are like very outgoing or warrior like, that have families and a husband, and the husband's like, you got this, babe, you go do what you're gonna do. Or they're also a part of it, like in this case Boldred's husband also is a cartographer.
His name's like, Horty, by the way.
Horty, that's right, I forgot about that. It's very
and their
cute.
daughter's name is Emilette.
That's right. They're all super cute. They're like a
Hmm.
really cute little family unit, but also she's really important, but because she basically wrangles these like crazy squirrels that
Yeah.
they end up running to on their journey and gets them to fight on their side uh when they go back to finally attack Marshank again and stuff. And she just is like very strong, very cool, and an owl. I've always loved owls. So
Hmm.
like she was of course going to be the top, like one of my favorite characters with this stuff. The second character is another strong woman character in
Hmm.
the context. It's another badger lady in this case.
Classic.
I know. Honestly, or do we have a good list if there isn't a badger on the top
No.
like ones and stuff? Literally, I already know there is going to be a badger in the next top ones and stuff. So like, if it doesn't happen, what happened in that book, man? So this one in this time, it's a little bit different from the previous ones. This Badger lady, her name's Roanoke, and she is essentially the leader of the Rambling Rosehip player troupe, and she actually performs also
Hmm.
at different times and everything, but she's a little bit more like the MC for the group. So she like
That's a really good way
introduces,
to explain
runs
her.
the whole thing. Yes, yeah. So she's very energetic, but she's again a badger
Hmm.
and super strong, buff, gets stuff done. And it's just really cool seeing this. She actually is the one that drags their cart along too,
Yeah.
which is just really funny. When we get to like kind of see the badgers and like how they use their strength for different things and stuff. So she is again one of the leaders of it. Her and I forget what his name is. What's the hare's name? Let
Ballad de
me check.
Quinswold.
It, it was
Ballad
what
de
was it?
Ballad de Quinswold.
Ah, okay. So both of them lead this troop and everything, and kind of play off of each other. And he is like more, like he said, he does limericks,
Hmm.
and is a little bit more like fantastical. And she's a little bit more down to earth, but still like has the performer energy and stuff, but in a little bit different way. So she's one of my favorites just because she's again a leader,
Yeah.
but in a very different context that is actually extremely helpful during the course of the story and
Yeah.
stuff with her experiences. So yeah,
Yeah.
those are my two favorite
She's
characters.
great. Man.
Yeah.
Brian just really knows how to write good characters, man.
Yes, I agree.
Including bad characters. Like the main bad guys
Yes.
in this particular book, which we did
Yeah.
comparison last time as well between Bane
Yeah.
and Sarmina. And this time
Yes.
we're doing another comparison rather than our least favorite character, because the two main bad guys in Martin the Warrior are Clog and Badring. They're both stoats. They were both
Yeah.
sea captains at
They
pirate
were
captains
rivals.
essentially, and they were rivals, sometimes friends, but mostly enemies.
Yeah.
Let's be real. It was
Yes.
sometimes they worked together, but most of the time they hated one another.
They were frenemies.
And yeah, frenemies if the friend part was lowercase and italicized and the enemies part was bold and uppercase letters.
True.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we just kind of wanted to compare and contrast because Badrang is this violent, sort of bad-tempered, classic Brian Jacques bad guy, honestly. He's the one that crashes his ship and then decides, I'm done being a pirate and I'm gonna be a king now, and sets up his slaves. He captures a bunch of woodlanders, makes them his slaves, makes them build a fortress, and then says, okay guys, this is where we're gonna live now. You guys are gonna do all the
Yeah.
work. My vermin are going to be the guards, and I'm going to be... He never actually calls himself a king, but he's
He calls
essentially...
himself a tyrant.
That's true, he does call himself the tyrant. So
Because his full title is Badring the Tyrant.
yeah. So it's just a bad dude all around. And then you have Clog, who is also a stoat, also a pirate captain. He makes land, and he's honestly one of my favorite villains because he's bad. Like, he's violent, he's aggressive, he's got slaves for his ship and is, doing those things that are evil and terrible. And yet he's also funny, and
Yeah.
it's like lighthearted villainy, I guess. It's like,
I don't even know if I call it lighthearted. It's
It's
just like
not.
he has a sense of humor,
Yeah, a dark sense
unlike
of
some of the
humor.
other bad guys. Yes, a dark sense of humor,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it a little bit more enjoyable than some of like the very straightforward
Mm-hmm.
villains and stuff.
Yeah.
Because you're like, he also kind of, and this kind of lends to his end,
Yeah.
tips on the crazy a little bit, and it's like you don't know if you're gonna get like the friendly
Yeah.
clog or if you're going to get the like I'm gonna kill you in your sleep
Yeah.
clog. Like you're not totally sure what you're gonna get from a
Yeah.
moment to moment, but that's what makes him interesting
Yeah.
and stuff.
There's
And
a really funny,
yeah,
tragically funny moment, I guess, in sort of towards the later end of the book where Clog and Badring both hire, that's not the right word. They both command one of their minions to go and assassinate the other one, but then both of the would-be assassins make mistakes and end up dead. And it's just really funny to me that the
yeah,
incompetence, there's a major gap of competence between the leadership of the vermins and then the actual the I don't know, citizens, I don't know what to call them, the minions. Basically there's
the
a major
masses.
the masses, the horde, really. Let's call them.
Which honestly, let's be honest, is a common again theme with all of the
Yeah.
bad guys. But also sometimes it flips. There's a couple of times in later books where it is like the person in charge is an idiot and the
Mm-hmm.
people under him are smarter. But
Yeah.
Brian does kind of rely a lot on the main guy is really smart most of the time, and his underlings are all idiots
Yeah,
and stuff. So
totally.
like that's generally what you're gonna like run into with these books. So
Yeah.
you are running into a little bit of a repetitiveness sometimes with the dynamic between the bad guy and his underlings
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. Clog was a little bit more interesting though because he was intelligent, but
Mm-hmm.
also he it didn't feel like he lorded his intelligence over
Yeah.
his underlings and stuff. So
Yeah, not all the time. There's still moments of like, you're
no,
being
yeah,
ridiculous,
yes,
stop
yeah,
it. But yeah, so
yeah,
just an interesting comparison. And the biggest comparison is that Clog is still alive at the end of the book and Badgering is
he
dead.
is.
In fact,
That is
Clog is
true.
the only vermin alive at the end. He's the only one that
Yeah.
makes it out. And his is kind of a, again, tragically comic ending because it's just
Yes.
him alone in the ruins of Marshank with corpses all around him, which
Yeah.
again, you know, it's a middle grade
Yeah.
book, so just remember that
Yeah.
as you're
This is
doing.
definitely one of the darker ones,
Yeah.
honestly, with some
Yeah.
things. Like, also the interesting thing is he's not all mentally there anymore
Mm-hmm.
either because
He got.
literally, like, like, I forget which point in the book, but in this latter half, he gets hit over the head with a
Yeah.
shovel or something, and, like, it's so hard that it, like, messes stuff up.
Yeah. It
So he is,
makes him
like,
crazy.
going crazy, and then
Mm-hmm.
he's just, like, dancing among the corpses or something
Yeah.
like
Ugh.
that in that last scene and stuff. So, like, yeah, this is definitely on the darker book. And so if you
Yeah.
do have a middle grade kid and you're like, yeah, you should read these, maybe wait to
Yeah.
introduce this one till a little bit later
Yeah.
and
It's a little
stuff,
bit
or when you
older.
feel a little more comfortable. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Having discussions about, wait, this is really grim, and you're like, yeah, you're right. It
Yeah.
is. It's really sad.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, now it's time for the nostalgia rating. What do you give it, Brianna?
Yes. For this one, it's a 3 for me.
Oh, fascinating.
Because, yeah, because I know that's like a lot lower than some of my other ones that I've given and stuff, but this one I barely read growing up. And it's
Okay.
again my whole dislike of tragedies. And
Yeah.
also, I have a really hard time reading tragic prequels and
Right.
stuff. I also don't like reading. This is like tie in a little bit. I also hate watching like movies or shows or even reading books that are historical based, and I'm like, oh yeah, this person gets killed at the end of etc. kind of a thing
So
and stuff.
Hamilton.
So yeah, Hamilton is a little bit different for me, but like there's some other ones that I could think of and stuff. There's
Fair
a couple of
enough.
times I'm like, yeah, I already know this Kirsten's gonna die at the end of this. I mean, in the context of Hamilton, he got to live his whole life, and then he was an idiot and all that stuff, and they died.
Was he an
So
idiot or was Aaron Burr the idiot? Or were they
they
both
both were
idiots?
idiots.
Okay. Yeah,
They
fair
were
enough.
both idiots. Yeah. So I give this a 3 because it's not nostalgic for me to read
Right.
this at all. For me, it was like I probably even could give it a lower one, but I don't know. It still was like good. Like it was like gave some context for some things, especially about
Mm-hmm.
Martin and stuff. But like also again, we don't just get to see some of that context within the stories that he's a part of and stuff. Actually, like he's
Yeah.
alive in part of and not in spirit. So yeah, that's why I kind of have it so low. It's just
Yeah.
like it wasn't one of the ones that I read a lot when I was growing up and stuff, and it is a little bit more on the darker end in some
Mm-hmm.
ways. Not, it's more on the like in the tragic end in this
Yeah.
case. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I'm gonna give it a 3.5
mm,
because my initial thought was, what about 4 stars? But actually, it was not one of the ones I read a lot when I was younger. It was something I
yeah,
read a little bit later as I was trying to read through all of them, and
yes,
later being like when I was in high school. So when I was a little bit older, rather than reading them when I was in late elementary school, early middle school. But I still think it's a step above um the other two, just because you can tell, especially because this is the 6th book published, that Brian's
yeah,
writing style has gotten, especially in terms of these books, because he's written other things, but in terms of
yep,
these books, his writing style has gotten more cohesive, and the characters are developing and getting a lot more depth, and
yeah,
as much as I don't like tragedy, I think when I first read this, I was in a season of my life where I did like tragedy, where I loved
yeah,
that there was a dark backstory to this major hero who is lauded throughout the rest of the series, that he had a grief that colored and changed him, and I think that made him more compelling a character, especially then
yeah,
reading Mossflower and then reading about him in some other
yeah,
areas. So I think I'd give it a 3.5 because of that, and because I also just remember being very emotional when Rose died, and then
yes,
being
yeah,
really emotional as Martin is doing all of this. And
yeah,
as is I read earlier, him giving his reasons for why he's not going to return to Noonvale and why he's taking a vow of silence about his experiences here. I think
yeah,
it just really emotionally impacted me at the time when I was reading
yeah,
it, and still makes me emotional. However,
yeah.
I'm giving it a 3.5 because I just know that there are more things coming that will have higher ratings. So
Yes,
it's
yeah,
coming. So
absolutely.
yeah, that's kind of why it's nostalgic, even for me. We kind of tied in our last point with the
Yeah,
thing.
why it's nostalgic.
Yeah. And I also want to read the end of the book, the literal last page of the book. Do you have any other
Yeah.
thoughts before I do this? Because I want to end with this.
No, I think that's a good point to end it on. I don't have anything
Okay.
further.
So again, I probably will I might talk about this in every episode. So I apologize if this gets repetitive and boring, but it's so important to me. Talking about Redwall as a place of peace, and oh my gosh, I have so
Mm,
many theological and like religious thoughts about this that bubble up
mm-hmm.
inside of my brain. So if you ever
Yeah.
want to know, ask me about them, guys. But especially as a place of hospitality, a place of refuge, a place of safety, and also a place of open doors that says like, come to us. You know, it's that sort of Matthew thing from the Gospels, from Christianity, of saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary." That idea
Yeah.
of come to me, and the end of this. I'm not gonna get emotional. I can do this. So it says, "There's always room for you in Bulltip here, Abricia." That's the two travelers that I guess relevant.
Yeah.
You don't need to know this. Our abbey is a place of friendship. Anyone, young or old, who has read or heard of Redwall may come and visit us. If you are honest and of good heart, no matter what the season, our door is open to you. Whether for the first time or for the return of an old companion, you are welcome. Please feel free to visit us anytime you pass by this way. And it's just,
Yeah.
it's so moving to me personally, because I love hospitality, and I love that idea of no matter what, if your intentions are good, if you're coming to conquer the Abbey, like, get out. You can't do this.
Yeah.
We'll defeat you because good always triumphs. But there's just something really precious about this idea of this stronghold that is firm and is full of good people and is full of people who will be open and warm and welcoming, and it's a place of refuge. And so
Yeah.
I think again, we're going to might talk about this in every single episode, so oops. But this book, this series, really hammers home that idea of refuge and hospitality. So
Yeah.
it's
that
so
was
good.
one of the reasons why I feel like, especially when I was like in middle school, when I was really reading these and getting into it, this series really hammered home like a sense of safety when things didn't always feel so safe.
Yep.
There was it was a place of refuge amongst the pages also, in a lot of ways, and that was why this series always, even after I kind of walked away from it and didn't read it all the time like I used to, it is a series I always remember. I still have like thoughts even now, even though I haven't read them in a long time, that I think about them all the time, and like ones that I'm like, yeah, that one was my favorite, or like that kind of stuff. So like this series that's the core of the series in a lot of ways, is like having that place of refuge, having that place of community, especially of like people that care about each other and will fight for each other and stuff. So yeah,
so good.
It's a really big point of it. Yeah.
Man, okay. I just need to take a second to center myself after that emotional journey. Anyways, thanks you so much. No, I have to retry that. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Readers Clubhouse. If you like this discussion and you want to hear more, you can find us on YouTube and Spotify every other Friday. If you're listening to this on YouTube, you can subscribe, like our video, leave a comment. What did you think about this book? Do you remember it? Do you have any thoughts? If you're on Spotify, you can also leave comments, I think. That's a thing you can do. Why not? Leave a comment. Yeah, it's a new thing. I know that because of a podcast I've been listening to recently. Who knows what that is? Anyway, check the episode description for our socials. Join us in the Clubhouse next time as we discuss the first sequel we're going to read, Madame Mayo. Bye.
Bye.